It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in a control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day and welcome once again to the Two Jacks listeners. We are on episode 62 now as we record this on the 22nd of February, year of our Lord 2024, where we look at all matters political and media in Australia and then have a good look around the world, what's going on there. And joining me, as per usual, all the way in Hong Kong in the middle of winter, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
G'day. All good here.
And what's going on in Honkers today?
No, it's just a little bit warmer. We're actually getting some humidity back.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Starting to warm up a bit. You're still wearing the black, so it's almost impossible to tell climate conditions just from your attire.
Yeah, well, it's always
black. You are absorbing light.
Yeah.
That way. I'm in the purple t-shirt today. So
no, it's you can be reliably informed that I am always in black.
There you go.
I've reverted to my Fitzroy North Carlton, young adulthood.
The Blues are having a hit out against Geelong at the moment at Princess Park, and I know only that Cam Guthrie went down early in the game with what appears to be a fairly serious quad injury. So that will be bad for the Cats. He's one of their prime movers. Jack, I just want to talk to you about this. I'm springing it on you a little bit. This is a story I'll be writing for the Australian tomorrow. It relates to a $10 million tender that will be announced at the end of this month, where a presumably not-for-profit, will provide counselling services for non-offending family members and friends of child sexual abuse perpetrators, not victims, perpetrators. The history of this is that it's gone through three governments' hands now, the Turnbull government, the Morrison government, and now the Albanese government. It relates to the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. Their recommendations were that some form of support be made available to the people who spouses, children of child sex offenders. The problem in terms of, this is a long way, I think, from community expectation, because as part of that whole implementation of the Royal Commission's recommendations, a lot of that has not gone well. The National Redress Scheme is difficult for people to get through. There are often long delays. Sometimes people are found ineligible. And if they're found ineligible, it's not just that they lose compensation or don't have access to compensation, but they lose all of the other areas of support, including counselling that's provided as part of the redress. So I've been speaking to a lot of victims who think this is most unfair. You might just want to address, Jack, how we go from a Royal Commission recommendation to finding substance in a $10 million program.
It's hard to say. You would have thought there are more important things to spend the allocation on than that.
Just having spoken to...
I've got some sympathy. I remember reading what was sort of a heartbreaking story of Father Gerald Risdale's sisters, elderly people, and they had no idea of what was happening, and he actually told them relatively early on just how extensive the problem was, and they of course thought they had a Catholic priest as a brother, and were quite proud of the fact, and it was horrible for them And I have a great deal of sympathy for some of the people who are in this situation who were just completely blameless. But I don't think that that ought to be a priority for how you spend the money that's being used to compensate victims of institutional child sex abuse.
Yeah, look, that seems to be, I think, what the community would expect. That this is in an ideal world, it might be necessary, but where there are great complications with primary victims, I guess the best we could say about the people you referred to, their Risdale's relatives, is that yes, they are bound to be subject to great trauma and all sorts of perhaps psychological complications. But the difficulty is that victims themselves are finding life very difficult, finding this national redress scheme very difficult to work their way through. Yes, it seems to be an unusual priority. It is a case of, I think if we want to look at where the blame starts, it is when the Royal Commission handed down its report to the Attorney-General. It was the days of the Turnbull government, and both Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten said that they would implement all the recommendations of the Royal Commission, and I suspect a lot of that was done without any real understanding of what those recommendations would lead to.
Yeah, the Royal Commissioner isn't in the same position as a government. A government's got to allocate the resources where they're going to make the most benefit. So just because a Royal Commissioner decides something, it doesn't mean that a good government would agree with all of it. That's a mistake for governments to say we will implement all the recommendations. It's good politics in the moment.
In the moment,
but it's not good government.
It's not good government. And it surprises me that in the course of these three governments, no one has actually said, look, this is a bad idea, or this should not be a priority. Now, my understanding is that a funding allocation was made in 21-22 of $10.2 million for this program. About $1 million or more was soaked up by what's loosely called research in order to basically figure out the difference between the recommendations and how those recommendations could be implemented. And now we have a tender which will be announced in February for the provision of those services. There is a group in Australia that does provide online and telephone support for the spouses of perpetrators, the family members of perpetrators. It's called Partner Speak. I presume what they do is quite useful. I do know that they have online and telephone counselling available to people. Presumably, it's a not for profit, but presumably staffed by a lot of volunteers or a few volunteers. At the end of the day, what they'll be doing is basically directing people to, yes, they can share their stories with people in similar situations, and that's good. I think that's beneficial. But also they'll be directing people towards government services that already exist. You know, whether they be contact your GP and get some counselling, those sorts of things. I don't know if it's going to cause a stir or not tomorrow. It remains to be seen, but certainly this is making victim groups, primary victims of child sexual abuse, regardless of their context, very, very unhappy. And that would be the way. I mean, as I say, I think this is a long way from community expectations.
Well, sometimes you've got to have the courage to say that we are recommending the key findings of a Royal Commission, but in practical administration of government, not all of them are suitable.
Yeah. I do know in a second-hand sort of way, that one of the commissioners, and I won't name that commissioner, has said that they are struggling with what's actually being realised, and that it was perhaps not their intention. In the end, I think the recommendations, having a good look at them, contain some sort of fairly airy-fairy nonsense. There is a funding allocation, or there has been funding made available for a support group for perpetrators or potential perpetrators, Jack. And in terms of prevention, I think that's actually a very good thing to do. I recall sitting in the Wood Royal Commission many years ago, the Wood Royal Commission into corruption within the New South Wales Police Force, that focused on pedophiles. And there was a convicted pedophile who gave testimony there, a person in their mid-30s. He said he'd been jailed. While he was in jail, he underwent therapy, but his sentence ended when the therapy was incomplete. He left prison. He went from Sydney to Melbourne. He started hanging around time zones, places like that. He knew he was going to offend again, and he went looking for some form of support where he could talk to someone, but there wasn't anyone. He ended up ringing the police and saying, I think I'm going to offend again, and the police couldn't do anything. It's not their job. He said, well, the police just said, well, give us a call when you can, when you do, after you do. So there is a preventative element there, but this other thing there with the support group for families and its friends too, Jack. I mean, there's this sort of potentially large orbit of people around a convicted pedophile who will have access to these sorts of support services, while some primary victims at least are not receiving the same support. And that, I think, is well beyond community expectations.
You can't have government by Royal Commission recommendation.
Very, very wise words, Jack. Just briefly on a related matter, Bishop Christopher Saunders, the Bishop of Broome, has been arrested and charged with multiple child sex offences. This is a long story. His charges are well overdue. It is alleged that he had over $3 million in 5 bank accounts, Jack, that he was allegedly running a bit of a racket of providing grog into dry communities. There were overtly some firearms offences. He hasn't been charged with firearms offences, I noticed, but there were potentially firearms offences that could have been taken this way. This was subject to a police investigation 2 years. 2 years ago, they found, shall we say, sexualised images of Indigenous youth, but they said we couldn't determine the age of them. If they were older than 16, no charges could be laid. And that investigation died. And then there was a subsequent investigation conducted by the Vatican themselves that led to Saunders actually being retired, but he's still living up in Broome. And after a search of his residence in Broome yesterday, he was taken away and charged and has been remanded in custody. It is a very interesting story. The charges are well overdue, of course. A very, very interesting story, and I believe it has at least some relevance to the situation in Ballarat. I think there was quite a bit of collusion. Bishop Ronald Mulcairns celebrated his 80th birthday in Broome at the invitation of Bishop Saunders. And I have to ask, who goes to Broome on their 80th birthday?
It's a lovely place.
It is a lovely place. It's not a lot of octogenarians popping onto a plane to go there, though, and it suggests that there was Saunders and Ridsdale. Saunders and Mulcairns actually were seminarians together.
Okay. Yes, if they're 80 years old in Broome, they're normally doing the big lap with a caravan behind them.
Yeah, well, not so much at 80, and not with Mulcairns in ill health. It's a very strange thing, and we might get some answers as these criminal charges unfold. All right, moving on to other things now. The government, a Labor government, must have felt a tremor up the spine, Jack, with the arrival of, I believe, 2 boats now that have arrived on the west coast of Australia. And is it deja vu all over again, Jack?
Well, it's always a good news day for the coalition when these sort of things happen. Not that there's really any difference between the Labor policy and the coalition policy. They're both going to handle these the same way. They will both do boat turnbacks. They will both use offshore detention. The advantage for the coalition is that internally Labor's quite split on this, and that kind of helps them. But this isn't the biggest problem with asylum seekers in Australia. The really big problem with asylum seekers in Australia is not the ones who arrive by boat, but it's the nearly 100,000 backlog cases of people who've arrived by planes and made claims for a protection visa. And almost all of these are unmeritorious claims. They will be rejected. But because the backlog's so big, these people get 4 or 5 years of living in Australia and generally working in some way or form, and that's why they're doing it.
Yes, we talked about some of this, Jack. A bit of a hole in our asylum seeker, where people arrive in this country seeking and seek protection orders. We know that Albanian crime groups have manipulated that situation to allow people to come into the country. Eventually, they are deported once they've exhausted all their legal avenues. But in the meantime,
that might be 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and a bit longer. And these guys know this. They have the contrivance of migration advisors and lawyers, and they get into all sorts of things. This Albanian group, they grow houses and then moving into cocaine traffic and these things, and knowing full well that eventually they'll be removed from the country, but it is their job to go in and basically establish a criminal enterprise.
Yeah. Running an immigration system is a bit like owning a Victorian-era house. We've got some experience of that, my wife and I. The roofing, it's always leaking somewhere, and you just got to keep an eye on where it's leaking and work out how to stop it. And that's how immigration works. You just got to keep an eye on it and work out where the loophole is and close it.
So we do focus on boat arrivals, don't we? Perhaps a little bit too much, because
it was a big problem. You know, both governments have kind of worked out how to solve it. I mean, in fact, Australia's doing a better job of dealing with this problem than anywhere else in the world.
I think at the end of the Gillard Rudd government, we're on track. That's a sort of pro rata basis for about 50,000 illegal arrivals by boat in the months of June and July before the election. So it wasn't 50,000 for the year, but it was, in fact, so if we divide that, it was 4,000 or 5,000 illegal arrivals in each month of June and July. And there was a sense that, certainly in the community, again, talking about expectations again, there was a view that the government had lost control over immigration generally.
Yeah, people will see this as a race question. It's not. It's really a law and order question. All around the world, a majority of people don't like the open borders because they want the orderliness and the rule of law to apply.
Well, let's just run through the numbers. And when I say boat people, people arriving by boat make up a very, very small fraction of this. There were 94,260 asylum seekers in Australia at the time of the election in 2022. The number has subsequently grown by 10,416 over the past 15 months. That's with, to the best of my memory, 3 boat arrivals, Jack. So A lot of people are arriving by plane, aren't they? And they're seeking protection orders when they arrive,
Yes.
or in the course of their movements around Australia, they make application for protection that way.
Yeah. It must be said that of those applicants, more than 90% are rejected.
And then they will have a process in which to appeal that rejection, and that would have been in your day through the Refugee Review Tribunal, but now it falls under the banner of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal.
Yeah, or it does at the moment until that's abolished and replaced. But yeah, so they're coming from countries that you wouldn't normally expect people to be successful in making an application from, Malaysia included, and the Pacific Islands as well. So there are ways to deal with this. The first thing you do is to take the as the Indonesians used to put it, take the sugar off the table. So the first thing to do is to process those applications on a last in, first out basis. So do the recent one straight away, so that if you apply tomorrow, you'll get your decision next month, and the appeal will go through, and it'll all be over in 6 months, and you'll be gone. So once you start doing that, you slow down further applications because you remove the benefit.
So it's a matter of getting through them as quickly as possible. But just to understand the process, if they are rejected, and 98% are through the Department of Immigration, then they can appeal to the AAT.
Yep.
And then they can appeal to the courts beyond that.
Yes, they can.
Right, and that's where we get to our 5 or 6 years, isn't it?
Yeah, and counterintuitively, the way to deal with that is to take the most recent applications and deal with them first, so that if you make an application today, it's all going to be done and dusted within 11 months. So, okay? And once you start doing that, people don't bother to apply because there's no real benefit in it. There's no cost benefit in it.
All right. Over to the supermarkets now, Jack. Brad Banducci, Woolworths CEO. Bit of a disastrous interview for Four Corners. Bit of a train wreck. And he's now fallen on his sword. I think he walks away with many millions of dollars in salary and remuneration. This basically presages the competition inquiry into the conduct of the supermarkets.
It does.
I'm hearing some gossip that there is a bit of evidence of collusion, Jack. Emails being shared between fairly senior management in both Woolworths and Coles. That would be cartel behaviour. That would be extremely serious, wouldn't it?
And then it becomes a question of what happens with that. And there's a bit of argument in the media about that as to whether the ACC should have powers to recommend or recommend to the federal court that the say Woolworths or Coles be broken up. Now that's a tricky question.
Well, this is something that the Nationals leader has pursued. He wants legislation created, what they call divestiture powers, where the government, or through the not the government, but the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, can basically start breaking up the supermarkets. I think that's basically breaking up supermarket chains. I think that's a pretty bold move, isn't it, Jack?
Yeah, I think Craig Emerson's response was pretty good. If we have to close half of the Woolworths and Coles stores, well, then we just have to hope someone else will take those stores over and open them up.
It's not quite right, is it? Alan Fells, the former head of the ACCC, that's right, isn't it? He was former head of the ACCC and he's held a number of other positions advising government. He said it's not obvious that breaking up Coles and Woolies into smaller units would be regarded by court or by anyone as sensible. There would be quite a loss of economies of scale, yes, and you would find that basic food services would be, food availability would become a problem in Australia. I have to ask, Jack, David Littleproud, this is nonsense stuff. Is he playing to the? Is he singing to the choir here in regional Australia, or is he this? Or is he really this stupid?
Or I just think he's playing politics with it, and it's not too bad politics. You know, people won't go into the weeds of this; they'll just say, "Well, he's sticking up for us against the supermarkets." I mean, it's not bad.
But what he suggests, when we sort of peel back what he's suggesting, an absolute disaster for regional Australia.
But most voters won't peel that back.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, all right. And of course, Banducci left. Jack, it was an odd interview. I don't know if you've seen it. The Four Corners interview.
It was the sort of interview that's going to be very good for the corporate media training industry in Australia, because
do not do this.
Boards are going to be instructing their C-suite people, do not do this. Get some training so you learn how not to do that.
All right, I see you want to strip the Band-Aid off this weeping sore in Australian culture, Jack. The great debate over whether we call the deep fried snack a potato cake or a potato scallop. New South Wales, and I'm thinking north of the Tweed, tend to opt for the scallop, while in Victoria it has always been and will always be a potato cake.
Everywhere else bar Victoria, it's the potato scallop, I think, is the geographic demarcation.
Yeah, what we're really talking about here is language and how language can be provincialised, particularly around colloquialisms. So we get all this great pressure from overseas, particularly from the United States, to communicate in a particular way, internet-based sort of stuff, and we now talk about dudes and all that sort of stuff, which is, American colloquialisms. But we've got a long history of having colloquialisms within our own country that are bound by sort of provincialism or regional sort of rules. If you wanted to get have an understanding of that, you would go through the various terms around the states and the capital cities for a pair of swimming togs, Jack.
The budgie smugglers, yeah. Or even a meat-based snack for a kid's sandwich, a Strasbourg sandwich in Victoria and a Devon sandwich in South Australia.
Well, I've got to pull you up there, Jack. Got to pull you up there. Strasbourg is a very different meat from Devon. I don't know what goes into Devon. I don't think anybody does. But Strasbourg is an entirely different thing. I think it's basically a Polish-based sausage, yeah. But it's got a little bit of a spice and a little bit of kick to it. Quite a lot of fat in it. But the Devon is just your all pink sort of thing. Yes, it's might be sort of lips and various other bits of farm animals. It's a little bit different. But yes, so this is how things arise. And so we're always going to have a bit of conflict over this stuff. All good fun, really. But I actually walk into my fish and chip shop, and every now and then, knowing that I'm talking to people who have got potato scallops on the menu, and I will actually ask mistakenly for potato cakes, and they'll look at me blankly, and then I go, scallops. Oh yeah, okay. So you do fall for it a bit. It's a little bit like if we are sticking the conversation to fish and chips. The dim sim, of course, is a very Victorian creation, Jack.
From Bendigo, I think, yes.
I believe there was it relates to a Chinese fellow who made this dim sim based on dumplings, and he created the dim sim rather than the dim sum, and was selling them out of food trucks outside the footy grounds in the VFL, Jack, in the old VFL days. And that's where it came from, about the 1950s. So I was appalled and a little bit scared when I first got up to Sydney and walked in a fish and chip shop. And not only did I notice the steamer wasn't there for the lovely steamed dim sims, but I also noticed that when I did order a dim sim, some horrific thing filled with carrot came my way. And further, I actually went and got some dim sims in Perth one day, Jack, and they were the size of bloody footballs. And not nice, very, very sort of batter heavy, not nice at all. So yes, the Vics have definitely got the wood on the rest of the country in terms of fish and chip delivery.
Just before we leave Australia, I think we can't let the Prime Minister's engagement go without acknowledgement.
We've had a number of festivals here, Jack. Are we due another one? What would be your advice if you pop your wedding planner's hat on? What would be your advice for Anthony Albanese's wedding? Should it be an all-encompassing shindig, a national public holiday, thousands at the ceremony and the reception or the piss up afterwards, or should it be a modest affair?
Milk it for all it's worth politically. I just love the announcement.
So, think there are dangers if he goes for the big 10,000 guests.
No. Make it a modest affair, but make sure it gets the maximum coverage, and that's the way to do that. He announced the engagement with a tweet on Valentine's Day.
I presume he had spoken to his partner by that stage.
Yeah, he had. The tweet was a photo of the pair of them with the caption above it. She said yes.
That's right.
And of course, immediately this produced a response on Twitter. At long last, Albo's found a yes campaign he can win.
Oh, I did see that too. Very cruel. And of course, this all comes while Australia is in the midst of a form of hypnosis, a form of cultural hypnosis known as the Taylor Swift ARIA tour. I think I've got that right.
Era tour, I think.
Era tour. She bits that I have read. I know some of her songs. I think she's a wonderful performer, wonderful songwriter, and she brings joy to a lot of people, and that's a wonderful thing in this world. Just because I don't get the joy doesn't mean it doesn't exist or that I can deride it. So it's actually wonderful stuff. 96,000 people times 3 at the G. Collingwood wouldn't get those numbers. So been an absolutely wonderful thing here, and it's chucking in just in Melbourne alone $1.2 billion in spending around the tour.
A friend from here, American friend from here, was intending to be in Melbourne last week and Sydney this week, and he looked to book his usual hotels, and it was horrified at the hotel prices in Melbourne last week and Sydney this week.
Yeah, they would have been a bit ugly.
Not everybody's a fan. Just to prove that earnestness is ingrained in the Schwartz media, the Saturday paper had this take on it.
I saw this, Jack. Read it to me. I was just going to pull it up.
That Swift's audience is overwhelmingly white women and girls. She exists in an apolitical world that refuses to engage with the social and political issues around her. If she does, the focus is squarely on the men who wronged her. That's all you need to know about the Schwartz media, in my view. They are way too earnest.
Well, Martin Pakul has whacked that up there and gone, what is wrong with you people? Why can't you understand joy in others? I mean, if you I get that people would understand, I feel joy, but when
That's
other
bad.
people feel joy and you don't, that is not something that you should be criticising. In fact, it's probably a way of saying you might be a bit of a sociopath. If you can't understand the emotional responses of other people, the other side of the Taylor Swift coin, in terms of the people who have a bit of a go at her, is the sort of American right, because they see her, and she's come out and said that she is a supporter of Joe Biden. And this led to the rather weird conspiracy that the Super Bowl was going to be all sorted out. She's contributed, they claim, some $400 million to the NFL just by her turning up and supporting her boyfriend, the Kansas City Chiefs.
Travis Kelce.
What position does he play?
It was a wonderful meme when
Kelce.
I don't know whether you saw the Super Bowl where he went and had an altercation with his coach, and someone superimposed on that. You've got to put me back in the game, otherwise she'll dump me and write a song about it.
I didn't see that one, but I did see there's the photo is of him just roaring at his coach, and someone had interposed the text for that was, "Have you heard of the sport called rugby league?"
I just like the way the coach just treated it like another day at the office. One of my players is.
Well, he actually did come. He's a passionate man when we love him. So 2 Super Bowl wins there, and the conspiracy proven. Donald Trump did have a bit of a go at Taylor, but Taylor Swift is not a person you take on without knowing that you're going to lose a lot of let's say the under 30
he
demographic.
Walked that back. I think he tested the waters and decided that wasn't a good plan.
Oh, he said he loved Kelce, he loved her boyfriend, although he probably doesn't like me. He said in a truth. I think they call them not a tweet but a truth, and he also suggested that he had made Taylor quite a lot of money, but he didn't go for it. Like, why is she being so unkind to me? Yeah, not too many people take Taylor Swift on. One, she's a billionaire, and they reckon she's made $1 billion on this era tour. You're quite right, so she's a billionaire. So they're always pretty hard to take on at the best of times. And then she does have this supporter group. So if you are going to have a go at Taylor Swift, prepare yourself for a public relations nightmare that may go on for many, many years. Good to see. Just wonderful to see the crowd at the MCG. I haven't seen the footage from the Sydney shows. Well, I think that's this weekend anyway. But just everyone just having a wonderful time. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Do you remember the Victoria Hotel? It's still there. Sort of like a little,
and a little bit of shine to it too. Used to have a little bit of prestige.
Yeah, but it was
attached to
it. Mates who were playing country week cricket, they would go and put up for a week there.
Yeah, it was for country travellers.
600. While Taylor Swift was in town.
Yeah, it's not that flash. Yeah.
That's
a lazy 1.2
That's paying
billion.
on the overs for the Victoria, I can tell you.
$600. It is a little bit. It's a little bit steep. No, you would not want to be going down unless you were going to go and see Tay-Tay herself. Look, yes, if you're not for joy, it doesn't have to be your joy. If you're not for joy, then you're a pretty sad sort of person, I reckon. And yeah, I mean, from one side, she's claimed to be too white, and not the proper sort of feminist.
Murray Schwartz, adjust the dosage.
Yeah, well, yes, maybe your cultural writers need to have a bit of a look in the mirror too. Now, Jack, overseas, Ukraine. The funding has come now from the States, or will come from the States. That's been approved. It's got to go back to the House, doesn't it? To be approved and then signed off by Joe, Grandpa. But that seems to have found some sort of political resolution there. The issue remains, can the Ukrainians drive the Russians out of the east? I read some figures, Jack, in terms of munitions development. Just in terms of artillery shells alone, the Russians will have they have 4 times the manufacturing power. So that means that they will provide 4 times the shells to the battlefield than the Ukrainians can. So we are still looking very much at, and I think some people sort of forget this, we are still looking at this huge military machine from Russia taking on a much smaller country. I think if we sort of remind ourselves where we were in sort of March and April of 2022, the invasion occurred in February 2022. Most people were expecting Ukraine to be just overwhelmed within the space of weeks, if not months.
And they were successful in, but it's a different sort of game, trying to push people back than it is to defend what you've got.
Well, we have Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance. Is he any relation to the former minister? Secretary of State?
No, J.D. Vance is the guy who wrote Hillbilly and became that. I think he was.
Okay.
He came from a background and was in the services in some form and went back, and he sort of made a success out of his history. He's sort of not quite pro-Putin, but thinks that what we're doing in Ukraine is a mistake. And this is a debate that's raging in Europe and in the United States, at least, as to what's the way forward.
Well, yeah, I get that, but I think we've got to get back to the original point. We go back to that February 2022 moment where a full-scale military invasion occurred in Ukraine. Cities were bombed, civilians were murdered. I remember a case of a journalist running down the road in Kyiv and watching a cruise missile just appear above his head on its way to explode and cause mayhem. What do we do? How could you possibly negotiate? Firstly, with Putin. I mean, we know from the Tucker Carlson interview, he thinks if we went back to negotiating points were first raised in Turkey, and he says that they should go back to that. But that all means that everything that they've taken in eastern Ukraine will remain with them, and the Ukrainians themselves, who were invaded upon, who have suffered civilian casualties, straight out murder, war crimes, will lose some of their territory. I just don't think you can negotiate on that basis.
I'm not saying you should. The question is, what do you do? I don't think there's any realistic prospect of getting Crimea back. It was part of Ukraine for a while. And perhaps there is of getting the rest of Eastern Europe back. But to look at kind of what's possible. What's our way forward? Are the Europeans, the Americans going to fund forever? What will they give them in terms of material? There needs to be a bit more of a plan than there is at the moment.
Well, I think we also got to look at what Putin's objectives are. And if he moves into Ukraine, then probably Moldova's next. They hate the Poles. There is that sense of a sort of domino theory in practice. And that by funding Ukraine's defence, either coming from NATO or the EU or the US, that is a way of keeping their soldiers out of a conflict that, will be on their back doors at some point if Putin's not stopped. So this is basically, I think it's line in the sand time. And you say, well, this far and no further, and we are prepared to go in a long haul here. We've got 2 years of war now, and we can probably outlast you. I mean, the Russians, as I said, it's a major military machine, and they'll be in for the long haul. But eventually, and this is the point, Jack, that the problems for Putin will come not from Ukraine, not from NATO, not from the US. They will come from Russian women mourning their sons being brought home in body bags. And when you get enough of that, when you have enough of that, that's when things will change in Russia.
It just depends whether anyone's going to spend the money. Look, it's a debate that's going in and in the United States, and it's got a long one yet.
Now, you've got some figures here, and we'll just put them out for the readers here. Russia has suffered more than 300,000 casualties. That's deaths and serious injury. These are according to US estimates. It has lost 3,000 tanks and 20 ships in the Black Sea. We were, one of the real positives from Ukraine's defence has been its work in the Black Sea, where Russia did have the ability to blockade trade and ships coming in and out of Ukraine. It can no longer do so. So that's a win. And the Russians, again, according to US estimates, have spent more than $200 billion on the war and seen about $1 trillion in anticipated economic growth disappear. I mean, those are big, powerful things, Jack.
The Soviet Union lost the war because they couldn't keep up with the American and its new technology.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Also, we have Russian elections next month, Jack. Won't be too many surprises there. We haven't really.
Is there a betting market
really
on that?
Mention. Yeah, I don't think the bookies will be all that interested in that. There'll be a couple of cardboard suited nobodies come forward as opposition leader. Of course, the real opposition leader was Alexei Navalny, Jack, and he's died in custody. Body seized for chemical analysis. The original reports were that he had died, that he had suffered sudden death syndrome. We know that he's been tortured in custody and subject to all sorts of mental anguish while there. The timing of his death and the timing of the election, I suspect there's not a lot of coincidence there.
No.
There have been reports of about 200 arrests in St. Petersburg, and they would be the sort of crazy brave who came out to sort of rally once they had heard the news. And meanwhile, elsewhere in Russia, particularly in Moscow, you've got people leaving bouquets of flowers.
And being arrested, being manhandled and arrested for doing so.
I know, where Navalny had spoken, and I suspect most Russians just sort of keeping their heads down and but just despairing as to where they are in the world at the moment. Another place of despair, Jack, is in Israel, and the US is basically on. Well, there have been reports. I'm not sure where we're going with this, but the reports indicate Biden imminently is poised to declare a Palestinian state with its capital in Jerusalem.
Well, to declare US support for that, they can't declare it.
Yes. So we're sort of driving towards a two-state solution around the West Bank.
Yeah. The difficulty with that is that the people who are pushing for a two-state solution in the West and not in the Middle East. There's almost no one in the Middle East who's really interested in a two-state. Well, the states want that eventually. No one's really. The Israelis aren't really interested, and the Palestinians either. Neither Fatah nor Hamas.
Hamas are actually opposed by through policy are opposed to a two-state solution. So this speaks to me the sort of, and it's not confirmed yet that the Biden administration is going to push for a Palestinian state based on the West Bank. It's not confirmed as yet, but it would sort of indicate to me that Biden has political problems at home regarding this. More so, this is perhaps more for domestic consumption than the global consumption.
Yeah, how to win Michigan, you mean?
Yeah, that sort of thing, Jack, yes. There are big problems for Biden and the left, as there are with Labor and the left, in the support for Israel. You do have, well, let's leave the Australians aside, but you do have a large group of people who may not come forward to vote who would otherwise have voted for Biden, Jack, in the presidential
Yep.
elections. So maybe that's what that's all about. But look, if sometimes politics is unpredictable, it is, it is getting very predictable in the United Kingdom, Jack. Couple of by-elections, won by Labor, 28% swing in Wellingborough. I think that's the biggest yet, biggest recorded. And then, well, there was one in 19. So it's the biggest for 30 years. The swing to Labor in Kingswood in the by-election there was 16.4%. Quick question: When do you think the Tories will go? I was talking to a mate of mine in London. He reckons October.
That seems most likely. There is one faint hope for the Tories. There was a debacle in the House of Commons. The SNP, the Socialist National Party, a motion to be.
You said socialist. I think you meant Scottish.
Yeah, I say Scottish. It's the same thing. On an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and that was going to be a huge problem for Keir Starmer because he set out a position that's much more nuanced than that, and he was facing a revolt from within the parliamentary party, people who are going to either vote against or abstain and vote against his. So in the end, he went and had a meeting with the Speaker, Hoyle, and had an alternative motion put up. Now there are calls for the Speaker to resign, but great deal of kerfuffle yesterday in Parliament. The Speaker's come out and apologised, and frankly, he'll probably hold on to his job just, but that doesn't so much because most voters are not going to be looking at the weeds of what's in Parliament. But what it does show is that Labor has the problem you're identifying for Biden is it is completely split on the question of what you do about Gaza. And just split, it's split from the majority position because the majority of Brits support what's happening, what Israel are doing more or less, and are opposed to Hamas. But a majority of Labor have a different view. And that's always a risk as election. So
yeah, I don't see it.
Might not
just don't see it. I mean, I just don't. I think there are so many domestic woes in the UK. We talked about the post office case in previous episodes, Jack. It is an outrageous set of circumstances there where people were locked up, accused of terrible crimes, and just a complete failure of government. And it just they just seem to be, without any hope, the Tories. We've talked about the polling. Labor's just nudging 50%, which is extraordinary in itself. And the Tories are around about 22, I think, Jack.
The real risk, the only risk for Labor is that their support won't turn up.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bigger threat was something you suggested before, that there might be some sort of Corbynite-style party that might steal votes from them. I think if enough people don't turn up, it's not going to change the results. Because there won't be too many rusted-on Tories turning up. I wouldn't have thought.
It is.
So
politics is different in the UK and the United States, where they don't have voting. The turnout. Huge difference.
Yes, it changes things. It does change polling, and polling is always a bit unscientific because of it. Where you do have compulsory voting, it's a lot easier to work out polling responses and actual voting behaviour. Back in the States, we were with Biden before. Now Trump, he'd be a little bit lighter in the wallet, about 350. I think it's 356 million. Plus 100 million in interest. His two boys have been fined $4 million each. Alan Weisenberg $1 million. Donald Trump can't conduct business in New York for 2 years. And where does he get? I mean, we know he's a billionaire, or so we believe. $2.5 billion he's supposed to be worth. But even if you got $2.5 billion in assets, coming up with at least $480 million in cash is going to be very, very difficult.
We have to sell assets.
Well, I looked at this, Jack, because we did talk about how the bond system might work, Jack. And so I did have a bit of a look at this. He would have to put assets to the tune of between 125 and 150% of that outstanding money. So he would have to put property to the value of around about 700 million up for a bond issuer to cover the fines in the event of appeal. So he has two options: he can pay the fines and appeal, or he can pay these fines and appeal, or he can make bonds and appeal. And if he's going to make bonds, he's going to have to put $700 million worth of assets up for grabs in order to get it.
You'd have to have internal knowledge of their financial situation to know which is the better choice. And you would have to appeal, because I think you'd almost certainly succeed on appeal.
I don't know about that. I think Justice Engoron has written a fairly comprehensive judgment that will be difficult to appeal against, Jack. I know people are saying, well, this was, the banks weren't unhappy about it, Deutsche Bank wasn't unhappy about it, and all that sort of stuff. One of the things he did, he had a property value of $200,000. That was its real value, and he's tried to pump it through at $10 million. Mar-a-Lago, he valued at $700 million, Jack. Engoron valued it at between 18 and 25 million. And there are reasons for that, by the way. We could talk about the value of the land. It's on the water and it's a substantial estate, etc. But it's not, as it stands, it's a country club. So Trump undertook this knowing full well that he would be restricted in terms of what developments he could make to it. And so you can't just sort of break it up, sell the property and then somehow make $700 million out of it. It really is, because I looked at that initial valuation from Engoron's at between 18 and 25 and thought, gee, that seems a bit light. It's not 700 million, but it's got to be a bit less than 18 and 25. But because it is classified as essentially a social club, it's very limited in how it can be developed.
Yeah, I don't think
so. That's the reason for the low valuation.
My belief: two things. One, he would win on appeal, and second, politically, I think this helps him rather than hinders him.
Yeah, you keep saying that. The other thing that has happened since we last spoke is that a trial date has now been set for the New York matters. This is the slush fund matters, featuring the evidence of Michael Cohen, his former in-house counsel, and so that trial will commence, or jury selection is due to commence, off the top of my head, on March 25.
Yep.
Meanwhile, we've got the Fulton County case, and that's been a bit perilous with the Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis being questioned about her relationship with one of the attorneys attached to her department.
The chap to prosecute the case, yes.
Yeah, I saw her give some evidence there, and she's pretty feisty. She said, "I'm not on trial here. The people who tried to steal the election are." But it is unwelcome attention around this particular trial, and I don't believe we have a date to start that one as yet either. That's so we've got the 4-count indictment in DC, which has been pushed back, no date set for trial. We've got the classified documents matter being heard. It's a federal matter, but it's being heard in Miami. I think we've got a date there, Jack, in August when trial is set to commence. And we don't have a date on the RICO Fulton County, Georgia. The only fixed date we have now, really, that's of any consequence, is this what we would probably call the least significant of his indictments, the New York slush fund stuff.
Yeah.
So not going to be many trials. I mean, I think this one is fairly minor league, really, and it'll get to, you know, electoral laws and rather complex matters. It'll be difficult for a lot of the members of the public to understand, other than Donald Trump's up in court again, and why is he in court, and is he being persecuted, yada, yada, yada.
And of course, if you go through them, the New York fraud case, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who brought these cases, campaigned for election as Attorney General on a problem of getting Donald Trump. The Fulton County thing, I don't think it matters whether Fani was having an affair with Nathan Wade or not. What does matter is that they went to the White House. The pair of them went to the White House and consulted with the White House before they did it.
Well, we don't know what happened there, Jack.
Why else would
we
they
don't
be
know
involved?
what was discussed? Well, I mean, you can talk. I mean, you cannot confirm whether it was discussed at all, can you?
But the general public are going to say, as an obscure official for the state of Georgia and her lawyer and the prosecutor appointed to do this at the White House, and they're going to know what they were there for. So the politics of this, I think, are excellent for Trump, all of them.
Yeah. Look, I think we're going over old ground here, with particularly in relation to Biden, and really what is, I suspect, a case of just two old men running that don't inspire Middle America at all, and the real risk there is it lies with the Democrats and Joe Biden. People cannot see. I don't think even a great many Democrat voters would look at Joe Biden and say, "I cannot see how we get another 4 years out of this."
Democrats think that.
I think the clear majority of the world think that. I almost have to flip past when I see Biden speak, because you just know he's going to make another little error, another little misspeak, another little, and he just does look frail and like he's barely struggling. So how can the Democrats move him on, Jack?
Well, there are a number of ways. Too late for someone to primary against him, because I think the state's primary application is the nominations for those are closed. So it's really to do it that way. The only real way is to get Biden.
Yes, that's the tap on the shoulder. The tap on the shoulder, excuse me. That's a tap on the shoulder in or around the Democratic National Convention. It can't be after. It's got to be during, or just a bit before that. And you think that will come from Big Bad Barry having a sit down with Joe?
I think it'll come from, because Obama still retains a great hold on a lot of people who are classified as kind of Biden supporters are there because they're supporters within the machinery of the Democratic Party.
Let's talk about some issues that are going to affect this election. Regardless of who stands, we would expect Trump to be the Republican candidate, as let's presume that Biden is going to be the Democrat presidential candidate. One of the big issues, Jack, and it's been, when we talk about Trump, we actually say, well, he lost 2018 midterms, he lost 2020, and then they went on and lost the 2022 midterms to a degree anyway. And one of the major drivers of that is the Roe v. Wade being overturned, and dragging a lot of women voters out who might not otherwise cast a ballot. We've had huge participation rates. Obviously, there was a pandemic in 2020, but there were big participation rates for the midterms in 2018 and then even larger still in 2022. So it is dragging a lot of people out. We hear from the New York Times that Trump has told advisors and allies that he likes the idea of a 16-week national abortion ban with 3 exceptions in case of rape or incest or to save the life of the mother. This is stuff that he should not be talking about at all, in my view. If he wants to be president, he will leave this alone. I did see him, and I forget, it was about a month ago, he was interviewed and he was crowing, as he does, about, that the Supreme Court justices that he appointed delivered the overturn of what Roe v. Wade, and he should accept all the credit for it. And you could just hear faces slapping or palms slapping faces from his own group who would have been saying, you cannot go anywhere near this. But there he was, and you could just see the campaign ad built around it from the Democrats. So I just can't see how he can put this one to rest. If he does propose a 16-week national abortion ban, which would be a bloody disaster, by the way, my views on this are pretty strongly held. These are matters that should be between a doctor and a woman, and that's where it ends. The state shouldn't be intervening at all. But a 16-week national abortion ban just raises this whole thing. He may not lose any votes over it, but he may drag a great many people out who might otherwise not be voting.
A 16-week ban would get majority support in polling tomorrow.
I don't even know where you get that from, Jack. Where's the support for that? Where's the evidence?
People are in favour. This is not just the United States; it's the same in Western Europe. What he would be doing would be bringing the United States in line with Western Europe. All around the Western world, this is what people accept. Around about 16 or 20 weeks.
They're not. These are not the rules in place in Australia.
No,
these are not the laws in place in Australia. And I think, you may have a view on this. I don't know whether that 16 week, whether that's something that you hold strongly, but it is just a piecemeal sort of arrangement. What we have in the United States, in big states like Texas, is total abortion bans, no exceptions, right? This is what's happening in the vacuum of Roe v. Wade. People's lives have been put at risk. A great many unwanted children being born, criminalised abortion, criminalising abortion in various states, including criminalising those who assist people to travel interstate to seek abortions. There are laws like that in some of the southern states. It's a complete and utter sort of return to medieval stuff. The basis of this is simple. Let a woman sort out her medical care with her doctor, and that's where it ends. The state really has no role in this. That's my view.
The 16 or 20 thing is not my idea. It's not what I believe, but it's what a majority of the people believe.
I don't even know where you get that from, Jack. I don't even know where you get that from. There's no polling, there's no data, there's nothing around this to say, we think the bans are really bad and what's going on in Texas is really bad, but we would accept a sort of compromise about this.
Yep, that's exactly what people think. It's exactly what people think in Western Europe.
I think you would find such a disparate response, such a diverse response, that it's really just going to cause him more pain. Donald Trump's advisors would shake him awake whenever he gets up in the morning and say, do not mention abortion today. Donald, do we get that? No, don't mention abortion today, because every time you do, you are dragging people out to vote against you. And I think probably there's even a bit of a mischievous sort of yarn from the New York Times. But he has actually said, know what I like about 16? Oh, Jesus. Mr. Trump told one of his people, it's even. It's 4 months. It's not 4 months, Jack, though, is it? It's not really 4 months. Anyway, Yeah, mass is never his strong point. I just think the more abortion becomes an issue, and it will be an issue in this election, the bigger chance is to Trump getting knocked off. One area where he does have considerable strength is in the southern border, Jack. He actually admitted in interview during the week that the laws that were put before the Congress were actually going to be effective. But that's his strength at the moment, isn't it? And he doesn't want that. He doesn't want the southern border issues resolved at all.
In 2016, he was the only candidate on either side who was prepared to do something migration. To say that
they're rapists and they're drug dealers, and they're some of them are very nice people.
Yeah, not that he was what he was proposing necessarily going to work, but he was the only one who took it seriously. People still remember that and look at the numbers and go, it went from 400.5 million, and this is an absolute election winner for him.
Meanwhile, Jack, the big driver in all electoral politics is the state of the economy, and the economy is going pretty well.
Yes, it is. People seem to think it is. And for that to change, but at the moment, the polling says that they don't think the economy is going well. They don't feel worse off. Is the key thing. Now, whether that can be turned around between now and November, I don't know.
Yes, but the economy is going pretty well. And generally speaking, if your economy is going pretty well, there are so many moving parts to the presidential election this year, including Biden's age and Trump's age too, for that matter, and intellectual frailty on both parts. It seems that you would think with the economy going pretty well, in a normal set of circumstances, you would expect Biden to be re-elected. But there are so many other moving parts to this. It's hard to know where we're going to end up.
Yeah, well, Nate Silver, the pollster, said that he thinks Biden needs to do 4 tough interviews in the next couple of months to he's fit to do it. And the general response was, no, you can't let him do that because it's not going to work.
I don't think 1, let alone 4, is really going to do it.
And there are things you can fix in politics in a campaign, but the problem with Joe's capacity and his age, that can't be fixed. It's not going away.
Yeah, it can't be fixed. And you put up a bright, sparkling candidate, and they're a bit thin on the ground, admittedly. That person's going to be able to dance around Donald Trump fairly easily too. He's got his own issues. He said part of the problem is he's like Hitler in one respect. When he gives a speech, it goes for hours. So there's always this, and I see this sort of Midas Network and others who are sort of, the sort of pro-Biden propagandists. They focus on everything that, every little misspeak, every little word that, the name that he gets wrong, those sorts of things. And they'll continue to work away on that. They're both old men. And the third-party candidate, who looks like a relative youngster, he turned 70 before the next presidential election too. Bobby Kennedy Jr.
The advantage Trump's got is that Trump can get out there and talk for hours, and Joe probably can't.
No, I think the more Joe talks, the worse it gets. Briefly, Jack, we've got immigration protests. I think there were some protests in Ireland this week, counter-protests as well in Ireland. The Netherlands, I think they passed the threshold, Jack, of there are more foreign-born people living in Holland now than there are people born locally, born within the Netherlands. So those people who are born in the Netherlands are now the minority. The person who told me that, I said, mate, have you spoken to the Dutch? Have you met the Dutch lately? It's probably going to be a good thing for their country. But these things are causing pressures all over the place, in Japan as well.
sort of very fiery counter protests in peaceful Japan.
Yeah.
This film is not going to go away.
Look, you're right. I mean, if you're talking about things that are not going to go, we almost kicked off the program with refugees in Australia, and that's been going for 30 years. Those sort of social pressures have been for 3 decades, going back to the Keating. So yeah, there's very little give in these things at all. So the Garda was involved. There was a. Oh, look, this is about 3 weeks ago. It must be said. So I won't get into it too much. But there are people out there going yes to internationalism, and there are people saying no to immigration. F off, we're full. In Australian-speaking islands. So these are social pressures, social and political pressures.
And even in Japan. Even in Japan, yes, it's 30 ago this year since I took an appointment to the refugee, and I quickly learned that if people asked you what you did and you said that, everybody had an opinion on what we should do, Jack.
Oh, we could go down the libertarian route, Jack, and just open up the borders. People can go and live wherever they want to live. What's wrong with that? That's what the libertarians want to do. I'm debating one in the Parliament in a couple of weeks, and the libertarianism is the laziest of all ideologies, and when you extend its sort of fundamental, that's what libertarians essentially would believe in: small government, therefore no borders, and people just move around. The anarchists actually think this now. They the anarchists actually believe on the left. They're sort of like the libertarians on the. The anarchists actually they're like the libertarians. The anarchists on the left, they actually believe that the fundamental failure of globalism is that we don't have open borders, and that globalism should be encouraging these things. So if you wanted to live in Western Canada, you just go there and just move there and. And that also means that Palestinians and Syrians and Iraqis and people from Pakistan, people from Sri Lanka, they can say, well, we would like to go to Australia. So, yes, that's just another way of looking at it. TV or YouTube, Piers Morgan, got a little bit, I don't know if I can say too much about it. Left the news a few weeks ago, and now he's working on Talk TV, which he claims is uncensored, and it's just going direct to YouTube.
Yeah, it was going through Talk TV's outlets, and now it's just going to go straight to YouTube.
Yeah, sorry, yes. So there are some. I won't go into it. We'll just stick with. There are some issues around all of that, but I won't go into them. He cannot possibly expect his audience to rise. That's in terms of people sitting and watching him, right? They see a lot of peers turn up on Instagram, and of course they can go and watch the and on YouTube. And they will rack up the numbers. So he might have millions of viewers, but they're not contemporaneous. For example, just to sort of give listeners an idea of the size. We had, I think, 200 million people had looked at least some of the Tucker Carlson interview. So there are big numbers of
very few of those would have listened through Vladimir's 1 hour history lesson. I can tell you.
Oh, I think it was a good. I couldn't bear it myself. I read the transcript. The first 40 minutes was grueling. It was not good. So off to the wonderful wacky world of social media broadcast. Do you think it'll work for him?
The risk will come. At the moment, just about every prominent politician or public figure in the world wants to go on his show. And there's a reason why they do is because he really does have audience reach.
He does. There's no doubt about that.
And the people who are deciding whether they go on these shows understand audience better. If they keep doing it, that will show us it's work. If they stop doing it, it'll show us that it hasn't worked.
Yeah. The other thing about that, if you're actually saying, if you are one of these high-profile guests and you're looking at going, do I really just want to be on YouTube? I'd prefer to be on a network. So he may not have that pull. We'll see. We'll see how it all goes. There are a few in the background relating to his editor of the Daily Mail, going back some
Daily Mirror.
Mirror, I'm sorry. Yes, I was going to say Mirror. I get them confused. The Daily Mirror. There may be some issues that arise from there, but I won't say too much more about that. Moving over to Australia had the Australian T20 side had a last ball. Very exciting stuff. I'm not a huge fan of Tim David, but by gee, did a good job last night. One of the things that does bug me a little bit about him is his feet. As good as I would expect to be, but he did do the business tonight. New Zealand at the Wellington Oval there, they put on and Australia overpowered them. Good knock from Mitch Marsh, and the other skipper was playing as well. Jack Pat Cummins. Probably the pick of the bowlers, but there's some pretty lamentable bowling figures if you're conceding more than 10. But a good win, and there's two more games to play there. Then the two tests start in New Zealand. I neglected very badly to as women's test team had a resounding victory over the South. Won by an innings and plenty. And of course, I did watch. I watched a fair bit of it in England at Rascot, and it's been written up as a horrible failing of Bazball. And I don't know that it was at all. Firstly, Indian bowling better. That's the thing. India's bowling was just better. Bumrah is such a bowler. He knocked over with big hookers. Kuldeep, the wrong bowler. He took a couple of wickets in the space of an over. Knocked over Duckett, who'd made a good 100, and knocked over the rather hapless Johnny. A couple of balls later, their bowling was very, very good, and England's batting wasn't great. By the time it came down to Bazball in England's second inning, they had to chase, I think, 500. I'm going to say 530, and they were all out front eleven. And Jack, they made them about 2 runs and over.
Yes, and in fact,
knocked them over about 50 overs.
And in fact, India's faster rate in their second innings.
And that featured, I don't know how much of the innings you saw, but that was the wonderful young emerging player, who's now got a couple of double tons. And he basically had the bowlers. Whoever was bowling, he was hitting them out of the park.
And his teammate Safari,
he looks good too, doesn't he? He's ready-made all-rounder.
He barbecued in the first innings when Jadea looking for looking single to get his 100.
It was a shot. He was well on track for a maiden 100 on you, but knocked up a good 60 in the second. By this stage, Joswell, who is a beautiful bat, he is belting the England slow bowlers, and let's be honest about this. England slow bowlers are just emerging. You've got Jack Lee, You've got 3 young bowlers, got about 10 tests, and they are going to learn, and they're going to probably learn the hard way in a lot of occasions. That's just the way it goes. They'll learn, but they were getting absolutely spanked. Jimmy Anderson got a bit of a touch up too, and there must be days when he looks at this and goes, "Gee, I am 40. Maybe I should 41, isn't he? Maybe hang the boots up." They were well short. They go to the 4th test, as you said. None of the major cities are hosting, but no shortage of attention and some very good. I'd have to say the silliest comment I heard from all of that was Ben Duckett, who said, "I should get some crack." He made a good home himself. "I think we deserve some credit for the way Jays were battered. You know, that we play this aggressive style, and he did that too." He said, "Mate, he got a couple of hundred. He got 200, and he was belting your ballers, right? Like there was no one with any answer. No one with any answer." And it was like, yeah, I don't know if you really got to the nub of the problem there, champion. And vying for the award for silliest comment was Ben Stokes, who said, "Oh, you know, I've got a bit of a problem with the DRS, and if it's going to hit the stumps, it should be." Forget the umpire's call and all this. Okay, yeah, all right, you might have a point, and it's a conversation we can have, but the playing conditions for this series are such that there is an umpire call. I don't know how you would not have an umpire's call, Jack. How would you not have an umpire's call on a DRS?
Well, I'm old-fashioned about this. I think the DRS should be get rid of the most egregious errors, and that's about it.
But what's the fundamental thing in cricket?
Yeah,
you've got to appeal, and then the umpire's got to deliberate. So you will, and the umpire's got to make a yes or no or out on an LB. That's what brings in umpires. Otherwise, you'll have an appeal, and then everyone will huddle around and decide if they're going to do this because the umpire won't be able to make a decision. It's really silly. I don't see you can do it that way. I do understand that if it's going to hit the it's out, but that you're also got to take into account the technology is not always, and so there needs to be a little bit of compromise.
There was a last Six Nations match, a rugby match at Murrayfield a week or so ago, where the Scots scored a try.
Oh, I saw that,
and it looked a bit like a try on the television, but it's a question of the ball rounded or held up, and with all the camera angles, it's really hard to pick that. And they went with the referee. Who'll think, well, that's fine.
Oh, there's no one else. I mean, you'd ask you and me, but the bloke who's right there 3 metres away is probably the one to ask.
Yep.
Quick touch on drug laws, Jack. I noticed this has got quite serious at Melbourne now. It's Josh Smith, isn't it? Sean Smith's
Joel.
son?
I know Josh. Could be Josh.
Joel. Yeah. And as part of the apparently the anti-drug authority has found a number of texts where he's texting teammates, and they're talking about this. This is not the criminal definition, of course, but they refer to this as Jack, and that's the anti-drug authority. They refer to this as tricking. That might just about be the end of his career, wouldn't it?
It may. It shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Fundamentally, I don't have a problem with AFL players having a bit of cocaine or a bit of toot. Yes, I know it's illegal, but you know, I don't have a problem with friends in the financial services industry doing it either. And I think we should treat it the same way, unless they're using this to get through a tough final quarter or to make them run a bit better. I think the AFL should stay out of it.
That's the problem. That's the problem, because you can use drugs, amphetamine-based drugs, to enhance training, enhance ability to stay on the ground for as long as you can, that sort of stuff. So, yeah, that's the bit of a problem there. But that's not the way the AFL sees it.
No.
We'll give you 3 strikes in a round. I'm up with this rather absurd poll. We do hope that the and his mates, sort of recover. Very amusing story. Just to wrap us up, you might have something else, Jack. But I was delighted by the way the Americans looked at the satellite or even drone shots of the MCG for Swift and wondered where all the car parks, because most stadia in the United States, big ones, they're out of town. You know, you got to catch or a pretty expensive Uber.
Or they do what they call tailgating. A couple of days earlier, and you fire up the barbecue at the back of the vehicle and all that sort of stuff, right? Which is
they do a little bit at the G. Used to do a lot of it at the old Arctic Park, VFL Park. Used to do a bit of that.
When this became a thing, when this Taylor Swift concerts at the MCG was so big, people were looking at the satellite and saying, "Well, where's the car?" And someone's quickly come back with a photograph of AFL Park, Arctic Park out there in Waverley, with and someone's put in the bottom of this. Yes, we tried that.
I noticed it was rather odd.
It was a terrible
report on this in the
FL,
Sydney
right?
Morning. That they said, well, there's Flinders Street, a short walk away, and yet Jollymont station's like a drop kick. You know, it's basically 500 metres, and Richmond station is probably about 800 metres around. Bit of a walk to the street.
Line.
You've got tram lines going through the sporting precinct. You'd be mad to drive to the ground unless you absolutely. You'd be mad. You'd be mad to drive because it's well serviced by transport. Sydney Cricket Ground perhaps not so much, but it, like the MC, is a sport arena right in the middle of a bustling city.
I got a confession to make. For a long time in the and 90s, when I was going to the MCG, I had to, if I wanted to drive, I would in the back of Parliament House and walk through the gardens. And the reason I could do that was I had a John Cain Ford sticker on and this is in the days of security. I just used to wave to the guys on the gate, and they kind of presumed I was a state government MP and up there, So it was my city
so
car park.
Jack. You wear your privilege on your sleeve. Yes, I don't think you'd get away with it nowadays. It's probably. Look, I think both our fathers were absolute champions at getting you in the ground when you didn't. Getting you actually into the stadium. Never mind the car park. They get you in there. They just let this one. And the blokes in the blue, they used to have these blue laboratory coats.
They did.
And they're just, sure.
My father was pretty good at it. Your father was Olympic and Commonwealth. And those listeners who don't know.
The number of times I was shuffled through the turnstiles without a ticket. Just let him through. I know this one, and they'd spot the bloke. I know that one. I don't. This one's not going to work. This one, so they'd know the blokes that they'd work. So I learned all sorts of rorts that way.
The history of it is that your father was studying phys ed at the time of the 90s. He was the phys ed students were used as press runners to take the from the journalists at the MCG up to the teleprinters, Old Herald and industry.
That's a fair run.
Yeah. And running backwards and forwards doing all this day. And I know that he took his sister and his sister-in-law, which is my mother, into the MCG and got them in the same way for the Olympics. And that was the start of a long and illustrious career of getting people into.
Well, I don't think he's a reigning world champion. They did, like, just we're going to wrap up very quickly, but he was born in, or he came from Sheffield, and he used to, I don't think he was a member, but he would be in the members, and he'd be there every grand final for about 15 years, and then he'd jump the fence as a siren blew, and then he'd be in amongst the throng of players congratulating him. And if you look at a lot of premiership photos immediately after the game, you'll see
he's there.
Like, and there he is embracing people who embracing it, and every now and then the team look at who the hell is this?
Did you remember the days when the MCC had a medallion rather than a photo cut? There was a Catholic priest of my acquaintance who had a medallion for a long, long time, and he used to check every year and send it off. It was just as well because the bloke who owned the medallion had been dead for some time. In fact, if they checked their records, he'd have been about 106 when the Catholic priest was still using the medallion to get it to the ground.
Wonderful raw stuff. Look, that takes us out for this week. And two Jacks, we've run over time, but that was because we were having a little bit of a walk down memory lane there in footy and games generally at the MCG. We want to thank you all for listening and tuning in, and we just want to remind you we do have some listener comments backed up this from the show where we put through in next week's show, and that's a reminder to you all. I believe you can still get hold of me on my DMs. If you can't, hit me up at the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com. Happy to take your feedback of any description, or you can hit up Jack on his Substack, Jack.
HongKongJack.substack.com. And Ross Nielsen did that, and he found an email address, which is jackhoisted@hotmail.com.